If you're a provisional taxpayer, then you have up until today, the 31st of January 2022, to submit your income tax return, or else SARS will issue penalties. Now, before we get to penalties and legislation, how do you know if you're a provisional taxpayer? I'm referring to individuals now because companies are automatically provisional taxpayers, but that's not the case for individuals. Now, a provisional taxpayer is someone who earns income other than the traditional way of earning income. In other words, if you earn income such as dividends, interest, rental income, or you have a side hustle, or you're an influencer, then you are most likely a provisional taxpayer. Now, you can be a provisional taxpayer even if you have a traditional income. In other words, you have a 9 to 5, and then additional to that, you have the other side hustles. However, if you just have a 9 to 5, then you are most likely not a provisional taxpayer, because tax is deducted by your employer as pay as you earn from your salary every month, then which means that then you don't need to be paying provisional tax. Okay. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, uba yintoni provisional taxpayer, we need to now talk about what SARS is going to do if you don't submit your income tax returns by today, the 31st of January 2022. This is now your tax return for 2021. This is for the tax season that opened in July last year in 2021, yes. And now if you don't submit that tax return, SARS will start issuing penalties. So previously, what SARS would normally do is, if you have not submitted 2 or more income tax returns, then SARS would start issuing penalties, or you would start facing penalties from SARS. However, last year, SARS changed the legislation and stated that from this year, in other words, from 2021, or from the previous account, from the tax period that we are currently in right now, which is the 2021 tax period, the one that we're currently submitting for now, which is the 2021. We are in the 2022 tax period, but we are still submitting for the 2021 tax period. I just want to clarify that so that there is no confusion. Now, SARS stated that from the 2021 tax season, if you have one tax return, they will start issuing penalties. In other words, they're changing now. Previously, you would start facing penalties if you have 2 or more tax returns that are outstanding. But now they've changed all of that. Now, even if you have one tax return that's outstanding, starting from 2021, SARS is going to issue penalties. Now, what does this mean? It means that from tomorrow, if you haven't submitted your 2021 tax return, SARS is going to start issuing penalties, which is why it's very important that if you're a provisional taxpayer, you submit your income tax returns today, no later than today, or else from tomorrow, SARS will start issuing penalties to you, and you don't want that to happen. Now, how does SARS issue penalties? Well, what normally happens is every single month that you are non-compliant, SARS issues a penalty. Now, penalties are not the same for everyone, because what SARS does is they look at what your taxable income, in other words, they estimate, if, say for instance, last year you had a taxable income of 100,000 Rand, they will sort of estimate around the general increases. They will look into your career and all those things. And then they will decide, okay, well then, this person in the past has been getting increases of about 5%. So we're going to assume this year again that the increase is going to be 5%. So they'll assume that your taxable income will be 105,000 Rand, and then they will issue a penalty based on that. Now, a person who earns 100,000 Rand and a person who earns 1,000,000 Rand, they have 2 different taxable incomes, right? So SARS recognizes that. As a result, they issue penalties according to your taxable income. So in other words, if you if your taxable income is 100,000 rand, and then the person next to you has 1,000,000 rand worth of taxable income, your penalties are not going to be the same, because SARS issues penalties according to the taxable income. What is the amount of penalties are you facing if you don't submit your tax return by today, the 31st of January 2022? Wow. Penalties differ between, they are between 250 rand a month, and they could go up to 16,000 rand a month. And when I say a month, I'm saying every single month you remain non-compliant. I'm going to make an example with the 250,000 rand. SARS will issue 250 rand worth of penalties. So let's say that you are in the 250 range. For every year, if you're not compliant in February, SARS will issue 250, and you still haven't submitted your tax return in March, SARS will issue a 250 rand. And then each and every month you don't submit, SARS issues a penalty of 250 rand. Now imagine if you are in the 16,000 rand group. Each and every year you don't submit, SARS is going to issue a penalty of 16,000 rand, which is very important that you actually submit now, because even if you are one tax return behind, SARS is issuing penalties. This is now a legislation that they introduced from last year. Also important, people need to understand that for non-provisional taxpayers, you were supposed to submit in November already. So if you didn't submit in November, chances are SARS has started issuing penalties. If you are fortunate enough to not have penalties issued against you, then you need to submit immediately, because SARS is serious about this new legislation that they have introduced. Now, for people that have not submitted their 2020 and 2019, in fact, from 2020 backwards, the old legislation still applies, but it will only apply for 1 year. And then from then onwards, after this year, then SARS will continue with the new legislation. So from 2020, 2019, and going backwards, the old legislation still applies, but it will only apply for a year. Then from then onwards, SARS will continue with this new legislation that they introduced last year, which is why it's very important that you remain compliant. It's super important. There are other videos that I on here on my YouTube channel that where I tell you how to ways in order to make sure that you remain compliant. And for those of you who don't know, I'm a registered tax practitioner. I help clients with submitting income tax returns. So if you are interested in my services, then I will leave my email below. You can drop me an email. I will gladly assist with tax planning as well, which is very important, by the way. Yes, and also please do subscribe, like, and share this information for someone who might need it. Super important. Otherwise, thank you very much, and see you on my next video.